How you doing there? Welcome back. How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samiches, Daf 68 of Masechta BavaKama. Friends, yo friends. Today's Daf is a big old Daf, and it talks about relatively interesting things. Shtikol BavaKavamis. Talks about relatively interesting things like Yeush, Yeush Kedi, Yeush and Shinu Rishus, Shtikol Shinu Maise. So these are like sugyas, So it should be relatively interesting, is what I'm saying. Okay. Now, we are going to start in Daf Samach Zayin with Beis about 5-6 lines from the bottom with the 2 dots. Ein hagoynev achar haganif mishalem tashlumei kefel ha. Okay, so if Shimon steals a cow from Reuven, and then Levi steals that cow from Shimon, so Levi does not pay kefil to Shimon. Okay, fine. Rav says, Rav Loshanu Ella Lifnei Yeush. Says Rav, this would only be the case before Yeush. Aval achar Yeush, kana'u ganef rishin, veganef sheni, mishalem tashlumei kefil leganef rishin. You hear that? Says Rav. Rav says Yeush kedi koni. Rav says that Yeush alone is enough to be kone, and therefore Rav says that if Shimon steals a cow from Reuven, okay, and Reuven gives up hope of getting it back, so now it belongs to Shimon. Which means that when Levi steals it from Shimon, well then Levi is stealing it from its owner, so Levi should pay Shimon kefil. So says Rav that when we say that Ein hagoynev achar haganif mishalem tashlumei kefil, it's talking about when there was no Yeush from Reuven, from the initial owner. And therefore it doesn't belong to Shimon, and therefore when Levi steals it from Shimon, he doesn't pay kefil to Shimon because it's not Shimon's. So again, Rav says, Rav Loshanu El Lifnei Yeush, when we say that Levi does not pay kefil to Shimon, that is talking about before Yeush, but if Reuven had given up hope from ever getting back the cow prior to Levi stealing it from Shimon, Shtikol BavaKavamis, Kano Ganef Rishin. So if I don't even remember what I just said, but if there was Yeush, so then it belongs to Shimon. V'ganef Sheni Mishalem Tashlumei Kefil Leganef Rishin. Then Levi would pay kefil to Shimon because it belongs to Shimon. I told you this isn't even. There's going to be more BavaKavamis. Rav Sheshes says Rav Sheshes Amina Kinaim V'Shochiv Rav Amila Shmaita. Says Rav Sheshes, I'm under the impression that Rav was sleeping when he said this, i.e. it makes no sense. It's going to be a slow-moving daf. Slow-moving daf. The Tanya, and I hope that my microphone holds up, because I really don't want to have to record this again. So Rav Sheshes Amina Kinaim V'Shochav Rav Amila Shmaita. The Tanya, because we're learning the Brayso, Amar Rabbi Akiva says Rabbi Akiva Pnei Ma'amra Teire Tovach u'mocher mishalem tashlumei arba v'achmisha. How come the Torah says that if Shimon steals an ox from Reuven and he sells it to Levi, how come Shimon needs to pay in the case of the cow, it would be 5 times but we'll just call it Dal V'Hei, okay? To Reuven. Because, as Rashi says, she'ahanu maisav, that by selling the ox to Levi, it created a kinyan. It now made a kinyan, and now it no longer now it belongs to Levi. And if we're talking about prior to Yeush, so if we're talking about Shimon stole an ox from Reuven, sold it to Levi, okay, and there has not yet been Yeush, Reuven never gave up hope, he still plans to get it back. Well then what does it mean, Shenishtarish Bechet? What does it mean that now there was a Kinyan? There was no Kinyan. It doesn't belong to Levi. Reuven never gave up hope. It belongs to Reuven. He can get it back. Mika Nishtarish, so there's no Nishtarish. There was no Kinyan made. El La'achar Yeush, so rather must be talking about after Reuven had given up hope. Okay, so if Reuven had given up hope, then what would be the scenario where Shimon has to pay Daled Vehei to Reuven? And if it's like what Rav says Rav Sheshis, if it's like what Rav says that Yeush Kedi is Kani, well then, when Reuven gave up hope, it belongs to Shimon now. And if it now belongs to Shimon, because Yeush Kedi Kani, when he sells it to Levi, Shelo Toveach, Shelo Mocher, he's selling his own thing to Levi. Why should he have to pay Daled Vehei to Reuven? If it was after Yeush, according to Rav, it belongs to Shimon. Shimon was selling his own thing. He shouldn't have to pay Daled Vehei on that. So again, Yeush Kani, if we're saying that Yeush is Kone, which means that when Reuven gave up hope, it now belongs to Shimon, then when Shimon then sells it to Levi, why does Shimon have to pay Daled Vehei to Reuven? Shelo Toveach, Shelo Mocher. He's slaughtering, or in this case selling, his own ox. His own ox. So therefore, the fact that he does pay Daled Vehei, it must mean that Yeush Kedi lo Kani. And that when Reuven gives up hope of getting back the ox, it does not yet belong to Shimon. And then when Shimon sells the ox to Levi, so now you have Yeush plus Shinui Rishus, it changed domains, and now is in Levi's domain. So you have Yeush plus Shinui Rishus, that affects a Kinyan, and it now belongs to Levi. And because Shenishtarish Bechet, because now there's this Kinyan, so Shimon pays to Reuven Daled Vehei, but it never belonged to Shimon. Okay? So therefore it's a kasha on Rav, because if Rav is right that Yeush Kedi is Kani, then why would he pay Daled Vehei? Shelo Toveach, Shelo Mocher. Where am I? So Amrei Kedama Rave, to which we say nisht. We could answer for Rav, and we could say that it's talking about before Yeush. Now, if it's talking about before Yeush, then what does it mean Shenishtarish Bechet? What is it? Why would it be Chayev Daled Vehei? So it's like Rav says Mipnei Sheshana Bechet, that he doubled his sin. Not only did Shimon steal the ox, he then sold it. So that's why he has to pay Daled Vehei. So it could be talking about even before Yeush, and even though sure, there's no Kinyan, because it's before Yeush and Reuben still plans to get it back, but because Shimon did two sins, he stole it and then he sold it, so that's why he's Chayev Daled Vehei. But it's talking about before Yeush, there's no kashas on Rav, because we're not talking about after Yeush. Right, so it's like Rava says in Pnei Shoshana B'chet, Achanam in Pnei Shoshana B'chet. So here also we're talking, right, just like Rava says in a different scenario that I believe we're going to see later on. Yeah, so he says the same thing here in Pnei Shoshana B'chet, and that's why Chayev. That's why he'd be Chayev Daled Vehei. Tashma, come in here. We have a price that says Utvacho Micharo, that he sells it, that he slaughters. Right, Shimon steals a ox from Reuven, slaughters it, sells it, or sells it. So now we're right. So the Paul says Utvacha o mecharos. Right. So tvicha and mechira are juxtaposed. Matvicha she'enu choseres. Just like slaughtering is of course final and it doesn't go back. So also we're talking about mechira. Af mechira she'enu choseres. So also talking about mechira that does not revoit, that does not go back, that is final. So now if we're talking about before Yeush, then what do you mean it doesn't go back? Of course it goes back. If Shimon stole an ox from Reuven, and Reuven never gave up hope of getting it back, of course he can get it back. What do you mean it doesn't go back? Even if Shimon sells it to Levi. So rather it must be talking about after Yeush. Rather it must be talking about after Yeush. V'sakataitech Kanye, and if it enters your mind that Yeush Kedis Kone, well then Amay Mishalim Dalad V'hei, then why would there be Dalad V'hei? Right? The pasuk of Tvicha and Mechira is talking about Dalad V'hei. Why would there be Dalad V'hei if we're talking about after Mechira, if we're talking about after Yeush, and Yeush is Kone? Why would there be Dalad V'hei? Shelo Tovech, Shelo Hu Mocher. So, and for the Gemara, no, it is talking about before Yeush. It is talking about before Yeush. And there's Dalad V'hei, like Rav had said, because Sheshana B'chet, because he sinned twice. He stole it and then he sold it. And what about this pasuk that says, comparing Mechira to Tvicha and saying that it's final? Prat l'shehikna l'shloshim yom. So Kedam Rav Nachman Prat l'shehikna l'shloshim yom. Hachanami Prat l'shehikna l'shloshim yom. Like Rav Nachman's going to say later, to the exclusion of a 30-day rental. Basically, here also to the exclusion of a 30-day rental, meaning that we're going to say, look, that pasuk, when we say we compare Mechira to Tvicha, and we say that Mechira has to be final, that pasuk is talking about before Yeush. Before Yeush. And the reason why you chayiv Dalad V'hei is because Mipnei Sheshana V'chet. Then what does it mean that you're only chayiv when it's final? That you're only going to be chayiv, he's only going to be chayiv Dalad V'hei when he sells it a final sale, but not if he rents it for like 30 days, then he would be potter for Dalad V'hei in that case. But we're talking about Lifnei Yeush. Lifnei Yeush, and again, it's not a shaila on Rav. Meisvei. So now we have a 3-part brisa. A 3-part brisa. Can you imagine? A 3-part brisa. BavaKama. Ganav uva acher ugnavo. So if Shimon steals a ox from Reuven, and then Levi steals the ox from Shimon, Harishin Mishalim Tashlum Kefil, so Shimon has to pay Kefil to Reuven. V'Hasheni Enu Mishalim Ela Keren Bavad. But Levi does not pay Kefil to Shimon, he pays Keren to Shimon. Now, case number 2. Ganav umacher, if Shimon stole an ox from Reuven, and then he sells it to Levi, uva'acher ugnavo, and then Yehuda steals it from Levi. So again, Shimon steals an ox from Reuven, sells it to Levi, Yehuda steals it from Levi. BavaKama. Harishin mishalim tashlum BavaKama. So Shimon pays Dalad V'hei for having stolen it and sold it. V'asheni, and Yehuda mishalim tashlum kefel, will pay kefel to Levi. Case number 3. Ganav v'tovach. If Shimon steals an ox from Reuven, and then he slaughters it, uva'acher ugnavo, and then comes Levi and steals the meat, harishin misham tashlum BavaKama. So Shimon pays Dalad V'hei for having stole it and slaughtered it. V'asheni enu mishalim ela tashlum kefel. And Levi, who stole the meat, Einu Misham Tashlum Kefil, does not pay Kefil Ela Keren Bavad, only the principal amount, only Keren. He does not pay Kefil for stealing the meat. Katoni Mia Mitziasa. So now we had 3 brisa. We had 3 cases in the brisa. So let's zoom in on the middle one. Ganav umacher. If Shimon stole an ox from Reuven and sold it, right? Shimon stole an ox from Reuven and sold it to Levi. Right? I think I pointed out the other day that sold and stole are a little bit too similar for my liking in these very technical contexts, but all right, it's part of the fun. It's part of the fun. Katonimia Mitziasa, we taught in the middle, Kimto Ganavu Machor Va'acher Ganavu, that if Shimon stole an ox from Reuven and sold it to Levi, and then Yehuda stole it from Levi. Where am I? So Shimon pays Dalad V'hei for having stolen it from Reuven and sold it to Levi. V'hasheni, and Yehuda, Mishalim Tashlumei Kefel, he pays Kefel to Levi. Now, Amos. What's this scenario? Ilema lifnei Yeush. So if we're talking about before Yeush, well, if that's the case, then why would Yehuda have to pay Levi? Kefel doesn't belong to Levi. If it's lifnei Yeush, if Reuven never gave up hope, well then it still belongs to Reuven, and it goes back to, right, it doesn't belong to Levi. So Sheni Amay Mishalim Tashlumei Kefel. Why would Yehuda have to pay Kefel to Levi? Shinu Rishus below Yeush mi'ikol l'man omer dekani. Nobody says that simply Shinu Rishus, that a change of domains without Yeush, of course that's not Koneh. And therefore, so long as there's no Yeush, so long as Reuven still plans to get back to his ox, it does not belong to Levi. And if it does not belong to Levi, then why in the world would Yehuda be paying Kefel to Levi when he steals it from him? So must be talking about that it's after Yeush. Okay. And if it's like Rav says that Yeush Kedi is Kona, well then that would mean that Shimon stole the ox from Reuven. And if we're saying Yeush Kedi is Kona, then that means that now belongs to Shimon. Well then why would he be paying Dalet Vehei when he steals, right? Shimon stole it from Reuven, why would he pay Dalet Vehei when he sells it to Levi? If it belongs to Shimon. He's selling his own ox, because Reuven gave up hope. So therefore it must be that Yeush Kedi is not Kani. And it only belongs to Levi because there was Yeush plus Shinu Rishus. Visu and more so the Katani Reisha, that when the Reisha says Gonav uva acher ugnovo, that if Shimon stole an ox from Reuven, and then Levi stole it from Shimon, so we say that Levi does not pay Kefel. But if we're saying that it's after Yeush, and Yeush Kedi Kani, well then that would mean that it belongs to Shimon, so Levi should have to pay Kefel to Shimon. BavaKama. Again, the Katani Reisha, that the Reisha says Ganav of Acher Gnava, that if Shimon stole an ox from Reuven, and then Levi stole from Shimon, Rishon Misham Tashlumei Kefel, so Shimon needs to pay Kefel. Vasheni Ein Misham El Keren, and Levi only needs to pay Keren. He doesn't pay Kefel to Shimon. Michle, I don't understand. Le'achar Yeush Kaminon, we're talking about after Yeush, V'sagadaytich Yeush Kona, and if it's what Rav is saying is true, that Yeush Kedi Kani, well then that means that it belongs to Shimon, so Sheni Amai Einu Mishalim El Keren. Then why is Levi only paying Keren? If he steals from Shimon, he has to pay Kefil to Shimon. So rather, it must be that Yeush Kedi is not Kone, and therefore it's a kasha on Rav. Oh my Rav. So now comes Rav, and he says, wait a second, hold your horses. V'tizbra. Hamatratzli, you think you're so smart. You think that that's really a response. Elo, dikatoni seifa, what about the seifa? Gonav v'tovach. We said that if Shimon steals an ox from Reuven and slaughters it, uva'acher ugnovo, and Levi steals it from Shimon, Rishon Misham Tashlum Abavach Misha, Shimon pays Dalet Vei, V'sheni Einu Mishalim Ele Keren, and Levi only pays Keren, he doesn't pay Kefel to Shimon for stealing his meat. But that makes no sense. Would anybody say that a Shinu Maisa does not make a kinyan? Meaning, when Shimon slaughters Reuven's ox, that's a Shinu Maisa. He obviously makes a change to the animal. Before it was a live animal, now it's just a hunk of flesh. So it's a material change to the animal. So it's a Shinu Maisa. Of course, a Shinu Maisa is Kona, and therefore, of course, the animal at this point belongs to Shimon, and he would only, meaning belongs to him, and therefore he pays back money to. Of course, he still owes Reuven, but it would be money. He doesn't give back the cow itself. So when Shimon slaughters Reuven's animal, he owns it now, and therefore when Levi steals the meat, of course he should have to pay Kefel. So something's weird over here. Why are we saying that when Shimon slaughters the animal and Levi steals the meat from Shimon, he does not pay kefil, that makes no sense. Shimon was kona the animal when he slaughtered it, and therefore Levi should have to pay kefil to Shimon. So what's going on? So Ela la'olam kula lifnei Yeush. So rather, look, the whole thing is not talking about after Yeush. It's talking about before Yeush. The ipuch seifa l'mitziasa, and switch around sort of some of the details in the middle scenario and the final scenario. Umitziasa l'seifa, okay, switch around the middle to the end to the middle, ve'ema achi, and say like this. So remember, we're talking about before Yeush. Gonav u'mocher uva'acher u'gnavo, right? So the middle scenario, where Shimon stole an ox from Reuven, and then sold it to Levi, and then Yehuda stole it from Levi. And we're saying that this is all before Yeush. So Harishin Misham Tashlum Arba Chamisha. So Shimon has to pay Arba Chamisha, right? Like Rava said before, Mipnei Shoshana B'Chet. V'Hasheni Eino Mishalim Elo Keren. Now Yehuda is only going to pay Keren to Levi because there was never any Yeush. The Shini Rishus below Yeush, and simply just a change of domain, but without Yeush, without Reuven ever having given up hope of getting it back, Lo Kani is not Koni, therefore it never belonged to Levi. And therefore when Yehuda stole it from Levi, he doesn't pay Kefal because it didn't belong to Levi. Now Gona V'Tovach, if Shimon stole Reuben's ox and slaughtered it, and therefore he's koned with a shinoi maise, and then uva'acher v'ganovo, and then Levi stole it from Shimon, harishin mishalem tashlume, I don't know what I just said, but Levi then stole the meat from Shimon, harishin mishalem tashlume abba v'chamisha, so Shimon is going to have to pay daled v'hei for having stolen and slaughtered an animal. V'hasheni mishalem tashlume kefel, and Levi pays kefel to Shimon, Dekanya b'shinu ma'isa, because Shimon had acquired the animal, made a kinyan on the animal when he slaughtered it. So don't say that it's talking about la'achar Yeush, and then we have all sorts of kashas on Rav. No, it's talking about lifnei Yeush. Rav Papi Omer says, Rav Papi, lo'olam lo teipuch. Rav Papi says, wait, don't switch anything around. Don't switch anything around. The whole reason why Rava asked the kasha was based on the seifa, that right, the seifa of the brisa, he argued made no sense to say that Shimon slaughtered Reuven's animal and then Levi stole it from Shimon. How could it be that Shimon does not pay kefil? I'll tell you how it could be. Seifa Beis Shammai. The seifa is like Beis Shammai, the amri that they say shinu b'mkol ma'omed, as we saw the other day with the Eslen Zona and the olives that she made into olive oil, the flour that she made into, right, the wheat that she made into flour. The Beis Shammai says that shinu b'mkol ma'omed, that even with the shinui, it doesn't make a difference, and therefore, even though Shimon made a shinui maaseh, it doesn't matter. That's not going to make it his, and therefore Levi would not pay him kefil. Where am I? Fine. If that's the case, kasha ratio mitzias l'Rav. Okay, if that's the case, then we still have the original questions, though, that the Reisha and the first scenario and the middle scenario are going to be kashas on Rav if we're talking about after Yeush. Fine. Omer Rav Zvid, says Rav Zvid, La'olam kula lifnei Yeush. Okay, says Rav Zvid that we're talking about before Yeush. V'achav ma'iskin shenisyaishu abaylim bilokeach v'lo nisyaishu beganif. So we're talking about where Shimon had stole. Wow. Wait, where am I? Okay, fine. Wow, my brain is like turning to mush, but we just have like another like 2 lines until the 2 dots. I just need to get another 2 lines, and then I could like, I don't know, try to solid up my brain. But wow, yeah, I'm telling you, BavaKama could like really turn my brain to mush. I don't remember my brain turning to mush in like Yavamis or anything like that. I don't know. My brain's just like been getting all mushy recently. I'm not exactly sure why. But anyways, it's just like this intense like braining. It's like just very, very intense braining. Like I said, like computer programming, you don't have to brain. You don't really have to do like deep, long braining sessions like you have to do with BavaKama. Like this was like intense braining. Okay, so now, Rav Zvit says that it's talking about before Yeush, and it's talking about a scenario where Shimon had stolen an ox from Reuven. Now, Reuven had not yet given up hope of getting it back. Shimon then sells it to Levi. Okay. Reuven then sells it to Levi. Reuven then sells it. What? Shimon steals an ox from Reuven. Okay. I just have to convince myself that my brain is not mush. Shimon steals an ox from Reuven. Reuven has not yet given up hope. Okay. Shimon then sells it, not steals it, sells it to Levi. He's chayiv daled v'hei for that. Now, once Levi has it, at that point, Reuven gives up hope, is miya'ish, and therefore, Levi now is kona it, if we're saying like Rab that Yehush kadi kani, and therefore, when Yehuda steals it from Levi, he has to pay kefel to Levi. Okay, so again, la'olam kula lifnei Yehush, we're talking about lifnei Yehush, and in the middle case, we're talking about v'achal ma'iskinich nesiyayishu apaylim belokeach, that Reuven was only miya'ish once Levi had purchased it from Shimon. V'lo nisyayishu beganif, but he was not yet miya'ish when Shimon had it. Davle Yeush, which is going to be, I guess, Yeush when Levi has it. V'lo tema mishum diba inon Yeush v'shinu rishos, and don't say like Rav Sheshes wants to argue that Yeush kedi lo kani, and you need Yeush and shinu rishos. Ela afilu b'Yeush lichude nami kani. Even Yeush alone could be kone, like Rav says, Yeush kedi kani. Skip the next 2 words. Ela de lo mishkachas de mishami tavau ganav rishon v'ganav sheni el ba'achi. And the only way that you could have a scenario, therefore, that Shimon would pay dal v'hei and Yehuda would pay kefel to Levi, it would only be in this manner, says Rav Zvid, that Reuven was only miyayish once Levi had it. So therefore, Shimon, when Shimon had it, there was no Yeush yet, but he would pay dal v'hei because Shoshana b'chet. Then when after Levi had purchased it, Reuven at that point gave up hope. So now Yeush k'di kani, it belongs to Levi. Yehuda now steals it from Levi. He has to pay Levi kefil. Wow. My brain got all mushy. We got to the 2 dots. Okay. I gotta pull myself out of it. Why do you think my brain's gotten like all mushy recently? Do you think maybe it's because I'm not sleeping enough? I don't know. Come on. I've gotten used to not sleeping enough, but maybe if I slept more, I'd be less mushy, but I don't know. Maybe my brain just after 4 years of like braining is like just starting to get mushy. I don't know. 1 second. Let me pause the video for a second. All right, let's go weiter. Oof. Okay. Where are we? Wow, take a little breather. Itmar, it was stated, Hamocher lifnei Yeush, that if a fellow, okay, so Shimon steals an ox from Reuven, sells it to Levi. Reuven has not yet given up hope. Rav Nachman Amar Chayiv. Rav Nachman says he's going to be Chayiv Daled V'Hei. Rav Sheshes Omar Potter. Rav Sheshes says that he's not Chayiv Daled V'Hei, so long as Reuven has not yet been miyayish. Rav Nachman Amar Chayiv. Rav Nachman says that Shimon is Chayiv Daled V'Hei. U'Mecharo Omar Rachmana Ve'Azovin. The pasuk says that if he sells it, he's Chayiv Daled V'Hei. Loshna Lifnei Yeush, Loshna Lachar Yeush. Doesn't matter if at the time that Shimon sold it to Levi, Reuven had given up hope yet or not. The pasuk says If you sell it, you're chayiv. You sold it, he's chayiv. Regardless of Yeush. Rav Sheshes Amar Potter, Rav Sheshes says that he would not be chayiv so long, right, Shimon would not be chayiv daled v'hei so long as Ruvain, still hopes to get it back. Has not been miyash. Chiyuve la'achar Yeush, who Rav Sheshes says that Shimon would only be chayiv daled v'hei once Ruvain has given up hope. The ahanu maisav, because only in that case, once Reuven has given up hope, so there's been Yeush, and then Shimon sells the ox to Levi, so now it's Yeush plus Shinui Rishus, the ahanu maisav, so then his actions of selling it to Levi has made a kinyan, and that it now belongs to kinyan, Levi. Avalifne Yeush lo ahanu maisav. But if Reuven had not yet given up hope, and therefore when Shimon sells the ox to Levi, so there's Shinu Rishus, but there's no Yeush, so lo mechayev, so then, where am I? Avalifne Yeush, lo hanu maisav lo mechayev, so then Shimon would not be chayev dal ve'edumya, the tvicha ba'inon, the hanu maisav, because tvicha and mechira are juxtaposed. And just like tvicha is final, and it also makes a shini rishus and a kinyan. So therefore, we also need the mechira to make a kinyan, to make a difference. Therefore, it has to be after Yeush, where there's going to be Yeush plus shinui rishus. But without Yeush, it doesn't make a difference because shinui rishus is not enough to make a kinyan alone. Rav Sheshes bin Aminallah says, Rav Sheshes, how do I know that I'm right? The Tanya is we learned in Brisa. Amar Bakiva says, Bakiva Pnema Amar Teira. Alchem Teira says, Tovach u'malchum b'shalom dal v'hei, that if Shimon slaughters or sells the ox, he pays dal v'hei b'pnei shenishtarish b'cheit, because he makes a kinyan, right? Because he had ahanu maisav. His actions had made a difference to make a kinyan. So Amos, and at what point would this be? If we're talking about before Yeush, there's no kinyan, right? If Reuven still hopes to get back the ox, if Shimon sells it to Levi, that doesn't make any kind of kinyan. If Reuven still expects to get it back, he'll get it back. Rather, we're talking about once Reuven has given up hope from getting it back, Shimon then sells it to Levi, so you have Yeush plus Shini Rishus, and therefore it succeeds in making a kinyan. On my Rava says Rava, Mipnei Shoshana B'chet. Whereas Rava says no, it could be talking about even before Yeush. And the reason why Levi would pay Dal Vei is because he double sinned. He stole it and then he sold it. Tashma coming here, we saw this earlier. Utvacho Mecharo. That we have a brisa that says that the pasuk says utvacha u'mecharu, that we compare tvicha and mechira. Ma tvicha she'ena choseres, just like tvicha is final and doesn't go back. Af mechira she'ena choseres, also selling it we're talking about where it is final. Amos, now at what point would it be final? Ilem lifnei Yeush, if it's talking about Yeush, amai ena choseres, what does it mean? If we're talking about before Yeush, what does it mean that the sale is final? What does it mean that it doesn't go back? Of course it goes back. If Reuven never gave up hope and he plans to get it back, of course he gets it back. So la'achar Yeush must be talking about after Yeush. Vishmamina chiyuva la'achar Yeush hu, and we're saying that the chiyuv of Dalvei is davka la'achar Yeush. Tirgum of Nachman, whereas Rav Nachman says no, we could say that it's talking about before Yeush. And you chayiv dal v'hei, like Rava said, mipnei shenishtarish mipnei shoshana b'chet, because you did a double sin, you sold it and then sold it. And when we say that it has to be final, that it doesn't go back, we're saying that we saw this earlier, we're saying that you're going to be chayiv dal v'hei, that Shimon would be chayiv dal v'hei when he sells it, a sale that is never going to revert, prad l'sheik nelo l'shloshim yom, to the exclusion of a scenario where Shimon sold it to Levi just as a 30-day rental. There he would not be chayiv dal v'hei, but we're talking about whereas before Yeush. V'amar Rabbi Elazar v'af Rabbi Elazar savar chiyuv la'achar Yeushu. Rabbi Elazar jumps on the Rav Sheshes bandwagon and says that the chiyuv of dal v'hei is la'achar Yeush, is after Yeush. The Rabbi Elazar says Teda shestam gneva yeyush ba'alim hu. Says Rabbi Elazar, you should know that a stam gneva, if Shimon steals something from Ruvain, we can assume that Ruvain gave up hope. She'arei amar Torah, because after all the Torah says, Tovach u'macher, mishalim tashlum arba v'chamisha, that Tovach u'macher, that if a fellow steals and then slaughters or sells, he's chayiv dalet v'hei, and he can only be chayiv dalet v'hei after Yeush. So, therefore, Rabbi Elazar concludes that it must be from the fact that if Shimon steals an ox from Reuven and then sells it, he's chayiv dalet v'hei, it must be that Reuven immediately was miyayish, and we can assume that stam geneva Yeush ba'alim hu. And that's why Shimon would be chayiv dalet v'hei. So we see that Rabbi Elazar jumps on the Rav Sheshes bandwagon that dalet v'hei is after Yeush. V'dumalo iyayish, but maybe Reuven was not miyayish. So elav mishum da'aminan stam geneva Yeush ba'alim no, because we say that stam geneva is Yeush ba'alim. V'dilma af al gav tulo iyayish, but what? Maybe we're talking about even though Reuven was not miyayish, there's still dalet v'hei. Amri lo salka daitech, impossible. Do me the tvicha, because after all we compare mechira to tvicha, ma tvicha da'ahanu maisav, just like tvicha. Right, when he slaughters it, it makes a difference. I guess the point is maybe that the shino in ma'isa makes a kinyan. So af mechira da'ahanu ma'asav, we must be talking about mechira also where his actions makes a kinyan. V'lifnei yeush ma'ahanu, and if there hasn't yet been yeush, so what kind of kinyan was made? Right, shino rishos without yeush it accomplishes nothing. Maybe we're talking about where we heard Reuven say, "I'm giving up hope." Amrei lo sagadaitech, we say nisht. Do me the tvicha, because it has to be similar to slaughtering. Matvicha le'alta, mechir le'alta, just like if Shimon steals Reuven's ox and slaughters it immediately, is chayiv dalet v'hei. So also mechira, also when he sells it, it's even if it's immediately, regardless of if you hear him being miyayish or not. Okay. Therefore, we assume that memele, when a fellow gets robbed, he memele is miyayish. But then Rabbi Yechanan asks a kasha to Rabbi Elazar. He says, Rabbi Elazar, you're saying that stam geneva, there's yeush. Rabbi Yechanan says to Rabbi Elazar, geneva benefesh, teichiach she'en yeush ba'alim. Wow, that when a person is kidnapped, they don't give up hope on themselves. Cheve, a lot of Yidden have been kidnapped this year, and some of them, thankfully, were released, and there have been some interviews with them, with a few of them, and you hear them talking about this Indian, about how they managed to not give up hope. But wow, does that seem like an extremely difficult situation? And there are still people that are kidnapped, and I certainly hope. Oh my God, I can't even imagine. Hopefully they could. It sounds like having hope was a pretty important thing over there. So certainly hope that they can continue to have hope. So says Rabbi Yechanan that geneva benefesh tachiach she'en yeush ba'alim, that when a person gets kidnapped, right, so they get stolen and they don't have yeush v'chayev, and yet there is I guess the kidnapper would be chayiv. So we see that even without yeush there could be a chiyuv. So mechladus of Rabbi Yechanan lifnei yeush chayiv. Okay, so we see that Rabbi Yechanan says that even prior to yeush, there he would be chayiv. Lachar yeush mai. What would Rabbi Yechanan say after yeush? Meaning, going back to dalet v'hei, if Shimon steals an ox from Reuven, okay, and Reuven gives up hope, and then Shimon sells it to Levi. So the shaila is, does he say like Rab that yeush kedi kani? In which case he would be potter from dalet v'hei because shelo tavach shelo mochar, or do we say that yeush kedi lo kani, and therefore it's not his, and he would be chayiv dalet v'hei? So Rabbi Yechanan Amar chayiv. So Rabbi Yechanan says that after yeush he would be chayiv because yeush kedi lo kani, he would be chayiv dalet v'hei. V'rish lakish Amar potter. Rish Lakish says Potter because Yehush Kedi Kani and Shlo Tavach Shlo Machar. Rabbi Yechanan Amar Chayev Chiyuve Ben Lifnei Yehush Ben La'achar Yehush. Rabbi Yechanan says that he would be Chayev Shimon would be Chayev whether he sold the ox to Levi prior or after Ruvain giving up hope. Rish Lakish Amar Potter. Rish Lakish says that after Yehush he is Potter. Chiyuve Lifnei Yehush. He agrees with Rabbi Yochanan that he would be Chayev for Dalvei prior to Yehush, but Aval La'achar Yehush, but after Yehush Kana, but after Yehush, he said, Rish Lakish says like Rav, that Shimon would be Kone through Yehush Kedi Koni, and Shimon would be Kone v'shlo Tovech v'shlo Mocher, and he would be selling therefore his own thing to Levi, and there would not be Daled. V'hei Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan has Sakasha to Rish Lakish, Gonav v'hikdish. If Shimon steals Ruvain's animal and then he's makdish Ruvain's animal, ve'acharkach tovach, and then afterwards he slaughters it, umachor, or he sells it, mishalem tashlume kefel, so he pays kefel for the theft, ve'enu misham tashlum arba v'chamisha, and he does not pay arba v'chamisha. Emas, and what's the scenario? If we're talking about before Yehush mikadosh, how could he be makdish Ruvain's animal when Ruvain has not yet given up hope, when it still belongs to Ruvain? Ishki yaktish is beso kodesh, amr achmonu ma beso shlo kol shelo. That the Torah says by hektish, it says beso, just like his house belongs to him, so he can only be makdish something that belongs to him. And if Ruvain hasn't yet given up hope, so it doesn't belong to Shimon, how could Shimon be makdish the animal? So it must be talking about after Yehush, and that's why he could be makdish it. V'tamid the hikdish who they know misham tashum arba v'chamisha. And the reason why the Brisa says that Shimon does not pay arba v'chamisha is because he was makdish the animal. The chikatovach the hektish kotovach, and then when he's slaughtering hektish. Therefore he's not paying dalvei. Have a low hektish. But if he wouldn't have been makdish it, tovach misham tashum arba v'chamisha, then if he slaughters it, he would have to pay dalid. Vei tavach u'machar, he would have to pay dalvei. V'sagadaitech Yehush kone. Now Rish Lakish, if it's like you're saying that Yehush kedi kani, well then when he was not makdish it sounds like he would be chayiv dalvei. But if you're saying Rish Lakish Yehush kedi kani, why would he be chayiv dalvei? Hamay mishalim shlo tovech shlo mocher. Why would he be chayiv dalvei? He's slaughtering and selling his own ox. If it's after Yehush, according to Rish Lakish. Well, I'm like starting to see things. That's how you know, like my brain is like mush. My brain is like mush. I'm like starting to like see things. Nothing major or anything. I'll get through the daf, but wow, man, serious braining. I'm telling you, my brain, it's probably going to get stronger eventually. I'm really giving it a starker workout. Okay. Omarle, so Rish Lakish responds, Ochav Mayaskinon Kigon, Shekdishu Bailim Biyad Ganif. So we're talking about before Yehush. We're not talking about La'achar Yehush. We're talking about before Yehush. And we're talking about where Shimon stole the ox from Ruvain. And then Ruvain was Makdish the animal. And then Ruvain was Makdish it after Shimon had stolen it. Umi Kadosh, but would that work? Rabbi Yochanan says, Gazov lo nisyaishu abaylim. If Shimon steals an animal from Ruvain, and Ruvain has not yet given up hope, Shnein einon yichol nahakdish. Neither one could be makdish the animal. Zelif neishenu shelo. Shimon, of course, cannot be makdish the animal because it doesn't belong to him, right? Ruvain hasn't given up hope. It doesn't belong to him. It belongs to Ruvain. Of course, Shimon cannot be makdish it. And Ruvain cannot be makdish it either because it's not in his possession right now. So I don't understand, Rish Lakish, how are you saying that's talking about where Ruvain was makdish it after Shimon stole it? He can't be makdish it at that point. So Amrei, who the Amr Kitznuin, that Rish Lakish holds like the Tznuin that we're going to learn about tomorrow, the Tnan that we learned in the Mishnah, Tznuin, I don't know, the pious people, we're talking about Kerem Revai. Who could tell me what Kerem Revai is? Kerem Revai is that when you have a new vine, right, the halacha of Orla, that by fruits, the first 3 years you cannot eat them. The 4th year you can eat them, but it's like Ma'aser Sheni. You have to eat it in Yerushalayim, or you could be transfer the value onto money, transfer the kedusha onto money, and then bring the money to Yerushalayim. So these very special people, manichin esamos, what they would do is they would set aside money for omrim, and they would say, "Kol nilkot mizeh yemuchul amos ha'elu." They didn't want anybody to chas v'shalom sin, that they walk by their vineyard and see a geschmacka-looking grape and chaper for themselves, but then they're going to eat Kerem Revai. They're not allowed to eat Kerem Revai. So in order to avoid that scenario, they say, look, whatever anybody is going to take from the vineyard, memela, the kedusha is going to be transferred onto this money. So here we see that after this grape was stolen, he's basically being makdish it. After it was stolen, he's then being makdish this money, transferring the kedusha of the grape onto the money. So even after the theft, there could still be hekdish. So kol nukot mizeh yemchul ala mosa edu. So that is how he could be. So Rish Lakish holds like the Tznuin that even after the theft you could still be a makdish. Ve'harei chazer keren levalim, but still, how could there be sort of kefil or dal v'hei at that point? Because at that point it would be considered that because once he's makdish it, then Rashi, if I understand Rashi correctly, basically when he's makdish it, it kind of then he can be makdish it wherever it is, and it then becomes his again, and therefore if it's his again, well then I guess there wouldn't be dalad v'hei anymore, because it's considered like it's back in his property, or something like that. So Kshamad Badin, well, it's talking about where witnesses had already come to testify against the thief, against Shimon, prior to Ruvain being makdishit. So therefore, Shimon was already chayiv for the payments at the time that Ruvain was makdishit. Hechidami, how could that be? Either Amrei Tzeitain lo, if the Bezdin had said to Shimon, go and pay Ruvain, my area hikdish, then what's the difference if Ruvain was makdishit or not? I feel lo hikdish nami, forget about hekdish, lo li chayve, and Shimon should not be chayiv dalad v'hei, because the Amar Rava, because Rava says tzeitain lo, that when the Bezdin says you have to give it, right, Shimon go pay Ruvain, tavachumacher potter. If he then slaughters it or sells it, he would be potter from dalad v'hei. My time outcome came into Paskul Milse, because since Bezdin said you have to go and give it back now, and they gave up psak din, v'tavachumacher, and then he goes and sells it, havale kegazlan. Well, then he's be'etzim a gazlan, right? If they already went to Bezdin, and Bezdin says you have to pay him, right? A gazlan is somebody who, steals kind of not in secret. So here, after the Bezdin says go and pay him, he then slaughters it, so he's a gazlan, he's not a ganif, and kefal above achmisha is only by a ganif, not by a gazlan. Chayiv ato liten lo, but if Bezdin says you are obligated, not that go and pay him, but you have an obligation to pay Ruvain, if he slaughters or sells, we will be chayiv dalvei. My time outcome came into the paska milsa, since they didn't give a psak, they just said that there's and it's a little bit, they didn't say go pay him, they said you need to pay him. I guess it's a little bit different. So akati ganif, who is still a ganif, there would be dalad vei, lo tzricha do amri lei, chayiv atalitin, so must be talking about where Bezdin says you have a chiyuv to pay him, and therefore he's still a ganif, and therefore there's still chayiv dalad vei. Wow. Okay. Wow. So witnesses came and said that and testified that he stole it. And then Bezdin says you have to pay him. And then I guess Ruvain was makdishit, and then he slaughtered it. So then there's dalad vei. That's a mouthful. Wow. We did a lot on this daf. Wow. We talked about Yush Kadi Kani. We also talked about the Yush plus Shinu Rishus. We talked about Shinu Maisa. We talked about Kefel Shlo Tovech Shlo Mocher. Our brain became amushi. That was the Samach Ches of Masechta BavaKama. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.